So, I think we said that we wanted to talk about when we first connected at the one of the sword fighting events that we went to around some of our values and the way that we like to interact with other people, let's say, and then maybe take it from there and see some of the lessons that we've learned from sword fighting and applied to other areas such as business.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent plan. And I think obviously we had met a number of times before then, and I was instructing at this particular event in Belgium. Um, and because the majority of the participants speak French, you were very kind to do the translating for me because of your fluency in English and French, and because of your experience with sword fighting. Cool.
So there we go. Maybe do you want to kick us off and tell us a bit about that conversation?
Yeah, so as I remember it, and I think this was probably what we're talking now, must have been 6 years ago. Would it have been about
I
that?
might have even been more than that, but yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Wow. So it was after an evening of instruction and training, and we were in the kind of eating hall area, and we struck up a conversation. And I think what prompted the conversation initially was some frustrations on both of our parts of how other people teach.
Yep.
Um, and I seem to remember both of us kind of citing a few individuals that seem to have I suppose, really, let's call it blinkered, or a kind of a one size fits all approach to their teaching. But maybe even more than that, that it's also seemed like the way that they were teaching was, I know best, so that's why you need to listen to me kind of approach. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, I think that it might people might recognize that from, let's say, more traditional sports and disciplines. In this case, Olympic fencing. It's very normal that the sword master or the weapons master, it, their word is law, kind of, and you can't really put that into question.
Yeah,
And one of the ways I think we connected on is that we're never above listening to a beginner or listening to somebody's question or suggestion, and the other way around also. I don't think I was ever afraid of challenging or questioning um, people when I thought something just sounded silly or didn't make sense to me, even if that was how it had been done for 10 years or 50 years or hundreds of years before that. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
I think that's one of your key skills, Thibaut. And I think that's actually really important um, in an organization for someone to have the confidence to call out things, and then hopefully that organization is at least happy to have a conversation about it. Because you might be wrong, you might not
Yeah.
have all the information. However, it should absolutely should stimulate a conversation where people feel happy to speak up and to see whether what is being used for what has been used, what methods have been used for the last X amount of years are still valid in the what actually even I mean nowadays is even more dynamic environment with things like the pandemic.
Because I think, and this is in part um, what started the conversation in around sword fighting, but it's very true in business as well, is if somebody asks you what would be qualified as a stupid question and you're not able to answer it, right? If it's a really basic question like, yeah, but why are we doing this? And you're not able to explain it, not because you've already explained it 1,000 times or because you're tired or whatever, you just can't really put it into words, then maybe you should question what it is that you're defending. If you're not able to explain it and your only answer is we've always done it like this
Yeah,
or just because, that
yeah,
doesn't hold up with me at all, and I don't think it does with you either.
That isn't a good answer, and it is really interesting
Yeah.
actually because I think about this in terms of facilitating because I've got quite a lot of experience in it now. Um, when people first start to facilitate, I think one of the challenges they have is that they're worried that they won't have the answer when one of the people in their lesson that one of their students
Yep.
asks them a question.
Yep.
Um, when actually, I think it's a strength of an instructor or of a facilitator to say, you know, that's a great question. I don't have the complete answer to that. Um, so not knowing everything, I think is an absolute strength, and I'm very wary of someone that has a really definite answer for everything. That gives me a red flag, if you like. It makes me suspicious.
I think you raise a really interesting point in saying that um, people do this because they're afraid of being found out or not being taken seriously, and that's why they become very defensive. Um, so maybe to move sort of as a segue to our next point then, because I think being able or allowing yourself to be challenged by someone within your discipline is one thing, but allowing yourself to be challenged by someone from another discipline, I think that's sort of the next step from that, and is also a big part of what you do and
Yeah.
how you teach. Right, so I always, when I talk about this with other people, I always use you as an example, and
Yeah.
I always use the fly fishing example because it's just anchored in my mind. Is that at some point, I think I don't even remember exactly what it was, but this is how I tell it. Right, is that you either talked to somebody who did fly fishing or watched a video or something, and you looked at the movement of this whipping back and forth, and you thought, can I do something like that with my sword? And that's the interesting part of the anecdote, not whether it worked or not,
Yeah.
right? I don't even remember whether you ever applied it successfully. I don't even care about it. What was interesting for me was that anecdote of saying, I'm going to take something that has absolutely nothing to do on the surface with my discipline, but I'm going to look at the part that's interesting to me, which is maybe the body mechanics in terms of sword fighting, maybe a philosophy or whatever behind it. Because, for me, something else in sword fighting is that in um, Olympic fencing, HEMA, LARP fencing, that kind of stuff, people tend to try and minimize movement, make their movement as efficient as possible.
Okay.
You talk about true times and the Cobra attack and that kind of stuff, um, which in some instances, in my experience, has made it hard for people who come from a more um, flourished martial arts background like capoeira or that kind of stuff to fit in, because their natural way of moving was seen as silly. And actually being able to listen to that kind of stuff and see some of the benefits, and at least try it out. It's not about whether it works or not. It's about being open-minded enough to see and try.
There was a particular session when I was with one of my best students, who's actually my brother-in-law, and I
Don't
I
don't tell him that. That will inflate his ego.
I know even more. I I I haven't always been like this, but it came to a point in my sword fighting career where I was looking for new angles, if you like, new ways of doing things that would give me an edge.
Hmm.
Um, so I thought to myself, okay, well, what can I be influenced by? What can I take as a creative seed that will change the way my body moves outside of the constrained kind of ways in which a sword fighter moves like this. And that's where I then came up with the kind of fly fishing attack, the cricket attack, uh, and a number of other
Is the
what
cricket this one? The
Well,
sort
no,
of
no,
body
no,
feint, or is
no,
that the
no.
other one?
It
Oh,
was
sorry, that's
more.
a below. All right, yeah, 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 yeah.
It on the face of it, these attacks in a sword fighting context seemed ridiculous, and it did make in the way in which I displayed them, it made my student just almost fall over laughing. But there was, which I think you were implying, there's a reason for that. Now, it's not that I don't use those, but there are certain elements of those, or certain the movement of fly fishing is this really relaxed kind of fluid movement, which can potentially give you an advantage. The cricket type movement, you're starting off with your sword really low to the ground, so it's an unusual guard. So it's using these as a creative seed and then seeing, well, does this give me an advantage? Can I apply it or integrate it into what I know are kind of principles of sword fighting to give myself an advantage?
So I know that for us, it's now almost second nature to, well, not almost, it's entirely second nature to take basically anything from any discipline or field that we know of, and every now and then hold it up against whatever we're working on at the moment and see whether we can learn from that, and I do it in a business context all the time, and sometimes I even surprise myself that some stuff works, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I do get it from quite a few people. The question of how do you do that? How do you train yourself? Maybe how do you even go about practicing that? Because if you've all your life been trained in these boxes, like you said um, before, that it's very um, very rigidly put into these almost academic boxes, right? How do you go about it?
I think one of the problems there, you've hit on a fundamental issue, I think, with most of our education system, in that it tends to be, not always, and there are different ways of teaching, but it tends to compartmentalize subjects, especially in secondary school education, into these really fixed subjects. This is maths, this is English, this is geography. And that's useful to a point, I think, in allowing people to be able to learn it maybe quicker. But I don't feel like you have the next stage of teaching, if you like, which is saying, well, now let's merge them together. Let's see how we can um, gain an advantage by applying a mathematical equation to something within geography, for
Yeah,
example. Um, and coming back to the sword fighting quickly, I was struggling with my flow because I'm naturally quite analytical and I used to be quite robotic with the way I would fight, and
yeah,
then just had a random conversation with someone who was a rock climber.
yeah,
This was years and years ago, and they said, "Oh, there's a technique that I've heard of where when people are climbing, if they count backwards in threes from 100, then that ties up the analytical part of their brain and helps them release the creative flowing part of their brain, and can help some people to climb more fluidly." And I went, I could apply that to sword fighting. So I think I've this is not quite answering your question actually, and I'm going to come back to that. But I think that was part of an awakening, if you like, where I'm now hopefully conscious that I can try and pick up patterns in other disciplines, and I'm open-minded, hopefully, to be able to um, apply them into other areas.
So I think, and I'm slightly mindful of time, but um, I think something that sort of is in the back of my mind is this feeling. Everybody thinks they're unique.
Yeah,
Every organization, every sport, every discipline, every individual person thinks they're unique, and they are right. Right? Nothing is exactly the same.
no,
Nothing, which is fine. But when people say that, right, when I go and talk to a customer and they tell me, yeah, but we're different, Right? You've worked with other people in the financial sector. You've worked with other IT departments. You've worked with other train companies, whatever.
Yeah.
But we're different. What they mean is what you know from these other companies is irrelevant. It's not going to help you in helping us. We're different. What I hear is, cool, this is a new challenge to which I can apply all this other stuff that I know already from all these other things. And, if this train company tells me, yeah, but we're different from the other train companies, like, okay, that's fine. But I'm also going to think about that time that I helped the construction company, and I'm also going to think about
Yeah.
that time that I helped the NGO, and I'm actually also going to think about sword fighting, right? And so I think you probably have to force your brain to think, to allow yourself to think in that way. But then once you start doing it, it becomes, I mean, to me, it's really intuitive, because it becomes so much easier to solve problems when you feel stuck. Just how would I solve this if this was an art problem or a software problem or a sword fighting problem?
That's a way of switching the perspective, isn't it? So
Yeah,
that's a method of seeing something from a different angle or a different perspective that can give you an advantage in solving a problem.
because the example that you mentioned is the agile approach, right? And Kanban and all of that stuff, where Kanban was taken from manufacturing, and lots of software companies work with Kanban boards, and in project management in general,
Yeah.
the Agile Manifesto was developed for software, but is actually deployed in many industries now, and so we're all doing it. But somehow, I don't know why. I really don't know why people need to feel like something has been adapted to their specific need, because otherwise it can't work. Somebody else or somebody really smart needs to go through the effort of adapting something to their specific needs before they can consider it as an option to solve a problem they have. I
Yeah.
feel like this is a common thing. So what I wrote down as a thought is, rather than thinking that outside the box is an empty space, right? Because this is the image that we usually have, is we usually have a square, right? And the problem that we're describing is inside that square. And when I'm going outside the box, I'm going there, but there's nothing here. This is empty. But that's not true. It's just another box there.
Yeah.
And there's another box here, and there's another box there, and everywhere. And you just
And
go
tho-
into
and
some of the other boxes that you have.
and those other boxes are knowledge that someone else has generated or other experiences you have in other
Yes,
areas. So why
exactly.
wouldn't you go in and have a look to see
Yes,
whether it can help you solve the
exactly.
problem you have in front of you?
Exactly. Right. Now, what would be the next step from that then? So we've said we've got this sort of hierarchical approach of saying I have more experience, or I have more status, or I'm just louder than you, so I am right, to I'm open to listening to other people that have less status, experience, etc. than me. Then I'm actually open to solving my problems with methodologies that come from. Oh, well, this is an interesting one, isn't it?
It is. Look at that. We've had someone else join our
Little
recording.
podcast. Well, you're now being recorded, Stuart. Welcome. We have talked about you before, and we are currently talking about how we apply lessons from sword fighting to business, which obviously you also maybe have stuff to say about.
So maybe you want to make sure your mic is really clear, Stuart, before you start talking. That would be
For
awesome.
instance, I'll cut that bit out.
Jeez.
So we've just talked about, Stuart, before you make comment. We just talked about that rather than thinking out of the box. Tibu was just talking about that actually there are other boxes outside of the box that we're in, and that they are probably filled with other people's experience and knowledge and our own experience and knowledge in other disciplines. So why not have a look in some of those other boxes, because they might help us solve the problem in front of us.
and I was making I know that you came in here with probably another purpose, but too bad. Um, the the point I wanted to make, or I wanted to get to, is that I think if you then push this to the next level, this potentially allows you to solve problems that you're completely incompetent in, and or that you can even help other people solve problems that they don't know the solution to. We were talking about this spiritual guide, or person who is more standing on the side of the road rather than leading the way.
I wonder, Stuart, if just linking to that, because I think you can give an example of this that I was involved in when we were working on Space Race, the piece of software, and you would come up across quite a tricky kind of development question, and we'd have a conversation about it. Did you want to describe how I might have helped as a completely rubbish developer?
Well, I mean, in programming terms, it's called duck programming. So every developer has a little rubber duck sitting on their desk, and if they get stuck, what they start to do is explain that problem to the rubber duck. The rubber duck is completely incapable of helping them actually solve that problem, but just by vocalizing and explaining that problem to something outside of themselves, often that can help. I mean, slightly different with you and I, Mark, because what you would then force me to do is, without knowing anything about the problem, you would challenge some of my assumptions or assertions that I was making about that problem, and force me to think in a certain way. In order to answer your questions, I had to then validate those assumptions that I'd made, and in doing so, it's very possible that I would end up challenging them myself using the knowledge and competence that I have. Obviously you don't as a programmer, but just by making me challenge my own assumptions.
So they become a mental nudge in a way to shift your way of thinking.
Yeah. So I mean, that'd be like Rubber Duck Plus.
Which is interesting because this links into what we were talking near the start of the discussion. I think it's people that are open to those challenges and to those nudges from people that know nothing about their area. So Stuart here has got it's at least 25 years experience in programming and computer software development. I have, okay, let's say I've got 2 weeks worth when I was 18 at further education college in Pascal. So I there's very little chance I'm going to solve the technical problem, but I'm challenging someone with a much higher mastery. But Stuart has actually taken that on board and used that challenge to come to a solution, and it worked pretty much every time, didn't it? Within 15 minutes or so.
Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder how it is, because it's not just about being open-minded. Because some people will just go, well, what do you know, and dismiss your opinion. But I know, especially between me and you, I know that it's worked. So there must have been something else where we've gone through a very similar process, and I've learned that actually this is a really valuable tool that you and I share. I don't have to know anything about what it is you're trying to achieve. You don't have to know anything about what it is I have to achieve. But this mechanism we've developed enables us to solve those problems ourselves.
Well, really funnily enough, I'm pretty sure that we partly developed that with our initial instructor-student relationship in Swordfighting years and years ago, but also the other way round, developing a board game where you were doing it the opposite way round, if you like, as well, which was very useful.
I'm interested to know what happens now the timer's hit 0.
Now I make a judgment call on how long it's interesting to keep the conversation going for, or cut it off. It's just for us to have a more active awareness of how long we're jibber jabbering.
You're going to edit out that fly?
Well, I was just looking at that fly. I was trying to think, what can I learn from that fly in terms of the process that we're going through, or why is that fly doing what it's doing? My brain was starting to go off on a different kind of angle there. How can we harness the fly? Maybe the fly is the USP in our kind of organization.
So
in our
to
podcasts.
Slightly stay on topic, because I feel like we're touching upon something, which is what Stuart said, is okay, it's not just the fact that I'm talking to a rubber duck, it's actually also probably something in the way that you ask your question or the relationship that the two of you have. And so the question to me is there an idea here or something that people can do or that people can learn that will help them be the Rubber Duck Plus?
So
if I may, I'm going to say definitely, because the approach, it's
are you gonna edit out those birds?
Yeah, if you want. Well, I mean, I'm not editing it, but yeah, sure, fire it over.
Are you not?
No, I'm not. But once you've edited out all of this shit, fire it over to me, and I'll take those birds out. So the way in which Mark approaches it is, it's almost, there's a similar structure to it every time. I mean, yes, contextually it might change depending on what the problem is, but essentially I've noticed that he takes a similar approach, which is normally to identify something that I've said, maybe an assertion or an assumption that I've made, and then he might go, okay, but what about if you either look at that differently, or if that wasn't true, or, and he'll pick up on certain things that I've said, knowing nothing about them, and then just challenge me to either explain them or think about them differently. So there is generally a similar structure to the way that he approaches it. Yeah. I mean, with me, when he was talking about the board game, the other way around, I'm always sort of looking at, I'll pick up on some particular point of focus that you want to achieve as a goal, and then I'm looking to get him to justify every reason or everything that he's doing in order to try and achieve that goal. Okay, well, why is that? Why is that necessary? What problem is this solving? In order to keep that focused, and often we'll end up either revisiting old problems and rehashing them and finding out that they actually work this time round. And yeah. So I definitely think we've both got a very, it's not the same structure that we follow, but whenever we approach this from the other side, it's always applying pretty much the same structure.
So it does very much go back to that first point of, first of all, so we've touched upon two sides of the equation, which is allowing people to challenge anything and everything that you say or that you build or whatever, and then the other side is challenge everything, basically. If you're stuck, obviously don't fall into analysis paralysis, but if you're stuck, just take something that sounds important and basically challenge it and see if it sticks. Because I can very well imagine that you'll sometimes challenge something, and then within a matter of a few seconds you can explain why that is, and then you just move on, because that wasn't the problem. That wasn't where it got stuck.
Very, very much so. Yeah, I'd say the majority of things, yes, they go like that. Mark will say, well, why is that done that way? Why are you not doing it another way? And I'll explain why, and he goes, okay. And I've done it like that. There's been no epiphany in that instance. It's like that because it is. But I mean, I really like your first statement. If you can't explain why something should be done in a certain way, maybe you should reevaluate the standpoint. In the business, some of like when Sam was younger than he is now, and I would ask him to do something, I never had any problem with him saying why. If I couldn't give him a valid reason as to why it is I'm asking him to do something or do it in a particular way, then it's probably not a good way to be doing it. If I can't come up with a valid reason to explain to someone why they should be doing something in a particular way. So
And this is why I think, because you were in a mentoring or teacher type role with Sam when he first joined the business as a young apprentice, and I think that's really useful, because by your student asking you questions, you become a better programmer and a better teacher. And I think that's some people gain a mastery in something, and I've said it recently a few times, that one of the reasons I got very, very good at sword fighting is because I taught other people, and by having to teach it, by having to analyze what I was doing and break it down, by being challenged by my students, I then had to have this watertight standpoint, or at least very good reasons why that would give me an advantage in a certain situation. And that made me that absolutely made me a much, much better teacher.
It takes you out of that we do it this way because we always have done mindset.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that leads me back to the sword fighting student that you told me about before we started this, Mark,
Yes.
who's
Yeah.
no,
Go on.
not you, Stuart.
Oh,
we
was
did
it? Oh, okay.
we did mention you because we talked
You
about
were in the previous, yeah,
fly fishing and
yeah.
cricket stuff that I came up
Right.
with.
No, other student,
Yeah.
who is what, 15?
15. Yeah.
15. And you mentioned that he is teaching some of the older kids in one of your kids' sword fighting groups. I am 100% convinced that him having to explain why he does stuff in a certain way
Yeah.
to these other kids to help them become better also makes him better.
Yeah.
And, that's, for me, I definitely saw a massive difference in my sword fighting ability when I started teaching sword fighting, and before that, because I had to understand why I was doing stuff rather than just blindly replicating what people were telling me to do.
And actually, in a lot of organisations, well, I've experienced a lot in sword fighting, but in other organisations as well, there's almost this kind of rule that, oh no, you can't teach until you've got this
Yes.
accreditation, or until
Yes.
you've got 5 years experience or something like that. And I think that's rubbish, actually. I think you should be teaching the stuff that you know as soon as you can teach it. I mean, obviously there are potential health and safety implications for some knowledge, and that's absolutely fine. But I think for quite a lot of knowledge, if you can help someone else that doesn't know that, they're going to gain from it. You're going to gain from it. So it's a double win, at least, I think. Stuart.
On a slightly tangential note to that, I mean, just talking about the whole process of teaching making you better. Because I know that there's loads of sword fighters out there who fight by rote. This is how you parry, this is how you attack. They don't, and they don't understand the mechanics of it. They don't understand the timings of it. They don't understand, how to manipulate distance and time. They just know how to do those basic things and how they're used and how they're employed. And I think, when you start to teach, you have to start to understand those principles of how to attack and timing and distance and how to manipulate timing and distance in order to gain. And as soon as you start to understand that, you really are, you're not fighting by rote anymore. You understand why it is you're doing what you're doing.
I love climbing for this as well. And in climbing it's very visible that you can only get to a certain level of difficulty by pure force and grip strength and all of that stuff. Beyond a certain level, you actually have to start thinking about body dynamics and understanding biomechanics and understanding why it works in a certain way, where your center of gravity is, all of that kind of stuff. Anyway,
Well, just can I say one last thing, because I
heard
it on the radio the other day, and a photographer was photographing people's
right.
hands, and one of the people he photographed was a blacksmith. And there was this quick interview with the blacksmith, and the blacksmith said, I do 20 to 30,000 strikes on the metal per day, but it's not just hitting it randomly. I have to understand how the metal moves, and I have to I've learned to hold the hammer in a certain way, not too hard, but kind of slight relaxation, holding it with the thumb and first finger, and then I have this motion of relaxation in that motion initially comes from my shoulder, then through my elbow and my wrist, and then finally my fingers as I strike with the blow. And I was thinking, oh my god, that's almost exactly the same as sword fighting. And it's someone who has gained a mastery in something and has thought about the body dynamics. And again, that was a really interesting other kind of area where I thought, oh, that's very interesting how they're going about it.
Well, I will have a bit more fun editing this than we had initially hoped, Mark. But yeah, no, Stuart's interruption, I think, injected some interesting elements, and this last bit went on for a bit longer. So thank you for that. We'll see how it goes.
Maybe he has to come in to partway through on every
Yeah,
podcast. I think that'd be quite
maybe.
good.
Maybe that's the thing. I just, let me know when you're doing it. Let me know
Part
when
of
it's
the
not,
USP.
and then I'll just put a random
Randomly
timer
come
on,
in.
and that's when I
Great.
come.
Great.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Tebow.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Speak to you next time.
Yeah.
Laters.